Millionaire takes Mistress to luxury dinner, gets shocked when he sees ex-wife dining with a CEO. Kimberly Peterson thought her tumultuous divorce from Stephen Harding was the end of all heartbreak. She'd endured the crushing betrayal, the shame of gossip in their ritzy social circle, and the sting of watching her ex-husband flaunt his newfound life of luxury with a seductive mistress at his side. Now, months later, a chance encounter in the glittering hall of a five-star restaurant is about to overturn everything they thought was settled. Because on the very night Stephen struts in, Mistress on his arm, he finds Kimberly laughing across the table from a powerful CEO. Sparks will fly, old wounds will tear open, and shocking secrets will surface. Kimberly Peterson had been raised with all the right manners, all the right schools, and every expectation that she would lead a picture-perfect life. Her parents, Richard and Becca Peterson, had built a comfortable existence in Connecticut, ensuring Kimberly never wanted for anything. Ironically, it was that same well-heeled background that brought her into the orbit of Stephen Harding, a charming, ambitious man from a modest upbringing who was determined to climb the social and financial ladder. They met at a charity gala at the Yale Club in Manhattan, a swirl of chandeliers and champagne. Stephen was an up-and-coming entrepreneur at the time, brimming with restless energy. There was an instant spark. Kimberly found his drive refreshing, a stark contrast to the entitled airs she often encountered. He, for his part, admired her poise and insider connections. They were an unlikely duo, but for a few sweet years, it seemed they were building a true partnership. Yet success can be a double-edged sword. Stephen's tech startups soared beyond their wildest dreams, transforming him into a rising star among venture capitalists. He soon became a millionaire, hobnobbing with celebrities and financiers, always hustling to sign the next big deal. As his fortune grew, so did the pressures and the temptations. Kimberly couldn't pinpoint the exact moment the marriage cracked, but it started with late-night meetings that bled into weekend business trips. Over time, Stephen's once warm gaze toward her cooled into distant politeness. When rumors of his infidelity first reached Kimberly's ears, she dismissed them as petty gossip. She wanted to believe Stephen was still the man who used to send her silly text messages from across a crowded room just to say he loved her. But by their 4th anniversary, she could no longer deny the changes in him. Friends whispered about a mysterious woman spotted in Stephen's luxury car, or a pair of extravagantly sexy heels found in his penthouse office. Each day, the sense of betrayal deepened. A year ago, after tearful confrontations and painful revelations, they finally divorced. The legal battle was brief. Stephen offered a substantial settlement, as if money could wash away guilt. Embittered and heartbroken, Kimberly moved back to her parents' estate for a while, licking her wounds in relative privacy. The tabloids caught wind of the divorce, painting it as another fairy tale union gone sour. In the immediate aftermath, Stephen seemed to revel in his bachelor status, papped by photographers at exclusive clubs, typically with a statuesque brunette on his arm. Her name, it turned out, was Miranda Stone, an aspiring model from a small town, hungry for a taste of the good life. She clung to him in paparazzi photos, her sultry expressions a stark contrast to Kimberly's more refined style. Kimberly tried to ignore the swirl of rumors about how happy Stephen was. Instead, she focused on rebuilding her life. She took a new job coordinating philanthropic events for a major NGO, throwing herself into charity work. In those volunteer circles, she found a sense of purpose that dulled the sting of her broken marriage. Still, no amount of philanthropic triumphs or supportive friends could entirely banish the hurt. In quiet moments, she remembered how she and Stephen had once daydreamed about traveling the world together, raising a family, forging philanthropic endeavors of their own. Now, All that remained was a string of regrets and a white gold band gathering dust in her jewelry box. It was during one of those philanthropic events that she crossed paths with Mark Bronson, a handsome and self-made CEO with an international chain of high-end hotels. She was planning a large fundraiser for an education charity, and Mark's conglomerate had pledged a significant donation. Over weeks of collaboration, Mark proved himself more than just an aloof businessman. He was surprisingly down to earth, with a kind smile that reached his hazel eyes. Though Kimberly was wary of wealthy alpha types after her ordeal with Stephen, Mark's respectful attentiveness slowly chipped away at her defenses. One evening, after a successful charity gala, Mark asked her to dinner. She hesitated, feeling the familiar pang of vulnerability. But something about Mark's sincerity made her say yes. She vowed to keep it casual, just two professionals celebrating a job well done. She had no inkling that dinner would become the stage for a dramatic confrontation. Nor did she suspect that her ex-husband and his mistress would be dining in the very same restaurant, setting the scene for a collision none of them could have anticipated. High-end restaurants in Manhattan often boast opulent decor, but La Premiere took luxury to another level. The establishment was known for its gold leaf ceiling, hand-blown glass chandeliers, and a waitlist that could stretch for months. Patrons shelled out thousands of dollars for a single meal, savoring artful plates prepared by a Michelin-starred chef. Stephen Harding walked in with Miranda Stone on his arm. He was accustomed to turning heads in such environments, and tonight was no exception. Dressed in a sleek Italian suit, he exuded the confidence of a man who'd conquered the business world. The hostess, recognizing him as a VIP client, escorted them to an exclusive corner table near the panoramic window overlooking Central Park. Stephen felt a flush of pride as diners glanced their way, a tangible reminder of his success. Miranda, swathed in a figure-hugging black gown, sipped from a glass of champagne. She cast an adoring gaze at Stephen, all too aware that half the dining room was watching them. This was precisely the kind of glamorous life she'd always coveted: caviar, champagne, and a wealthy partner who showered her with lavish gifts. She savored every second of it, from the hush of the maitre d's voice when addressing them to the swirl of paparazzi who sometimes lurked outside. As they browsed the menu, discussing their upcoming trip to Street Bart's, Miranda angled her phone to snap a discreet selfie. Stephen gently took her hand, cautioning her to keep a low profile. While he reveled in success, he preferred carefully managed publicity, especially after the fiasco of his messy divorce. Miranda pouted, but complied. She understood that the real prize was continuing her association with him, not a fleeting viral post. Meanwhile, across the restaurant, the hostess was guiding Mark Bronson and Kimberly Peterson to a similarly exclusive table. Mark, possessing the quiet confidence of a man who'd built an empire from scratch, wore a perfectly tailored navy suit. Kimberly glided beside him in an elegant deep blue gown that highlighted her figure without being ostentatious. She felt a mix of excitement and nerves. Mark was not only a supportive philanthropic partner, but also a man she found increasingly intriguing. The table Mark had reserved was near the center of the dining room, giving them an unobstructed view of the flamboyant setting. Soft candlelight danced across polished cutlery as they settled in. Kimberly folded her hands on her lap, steeling herself to remain poised. She sensed that Mark's invitation might be more than just a casual meal, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for anything deeper. Their conversation began with light banter about the successful charity fundraiser, drifting into Mark's plans to expand his hotel chain in Asia. Kimberly chimed in about philanthropic outreach in those regions, her eyes lighting up as she described potential partnerships. Mark found her passion infectious. It was a refreshing change from the many gold diggers he'd encountered in his climb to CEO status. Halfway through their amuse-bouche, Mark offered her a toast. "To you, Kimberly," he said, "for reminding me that business can be about more than profit. You've helped me see how much good we can do for education worldwide." Kimberly's cheeks warmed. "You give me too much credit, Mark. I just help connect the right donors with the right causes." Their glasses clinked softly, and for a moment their eyes locked in an unspoken acknowledgement that something deeper connected them than professional synergy. Kimberly felt her heart flutter, a sensation she hadn't experienced since well before her divorce. Perhaps she was ready to explore new possibilities after all. On the opposite side of the restaurant, however, tensions were brewing. Miranda, scanning the room with the practiced cunning of a social climber, stiffened. She thought she recognized someone. Leaning across the table, she murmured to Stephen, "Is that your ex-wife over there? By the center arrangement?" Stephen's gaze followed Miranda's pointed look. When he saw Kimberly's familiar profile, elegantly poised beside a man he recognized as Mark Bronson, the powerful hotel magnate's shock rippled through him. The ex-wife he had so callously tossed aside was here, dressed to the nines, smiling warmly at a man who dwarfed Stephen in net worth. A pang of unexpected jealousy coiled in his chest, followed by a mixture of anger and intrigue. Trying to mask his emotions, Stephen forced a chuckle. "What a small world," he said, though his voice sounded tight to his own ears. This was no random coffee shop or casual bistro. La Première was a fortress of exclusivity. People who dined here were among the elite of the elite. The last person he wanted to see was Kimberly, especially not in the company of someone as influential and wealthy as Mark Bronson. Miranda arched a manicured eyebrow, an almost feline grin curling her lips. "Maybe we should say hello," she suggested, her tone dripping with false innocence. "It's only polite to greet an ex-spouse and her friend." Stephen drained his champagne flute. "We'll see," he muttered, eyeing Kimberly's table with mounting unease. If there was one thing he despised, it was feeling overshadowed, and Mark Bronson's presence threatened exactly that. Part of Stephen wanted to march over and stake a claim on his social territory, but he realized any such confrontation could spiral quickly. As the waitstaff flitted around, delivering sumptuous plates of Wagyu beef and lobster risotto, two separate tables braced for collision. Kimberly had no clue Stephen was there, mere steps away, feeling the scorching sting of envy. Mark, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware that the CEO of a tech startup and Kimberly's ex-husband was studying them from afar. In just a few moments, this carefully curated world of fine dining would descend into a swirl of old resentments and new temptations. The night was young, and sparks were about to fly in ways none of them could have predicted. Stephen's entire body felt on edge. He kept glancing toward Kimberly's table, attempting to gauge the intimacy level between her and Mark Bronson. Miranda, keen to exploit the drama, periodically whispered commentary into Stephen's ear. "They look pretty cozy, don't they? Or he must be paying for all those diamonds she's wearing," referring to the delicate diamond drop earrings that had once been a gift from Stephen himself. Her sly remarks sent Stephen's jaw into a tighter clench each time. A part of him wanted to dismiss the jealousy as irrational. After all, wasn't he the one who had ended things and moved on with Miranda? Yet seeing Kimberly in the glamorous glow of La Première, looking more confident than ever while sitting beside a man with as much power and wealth, if not more, ignited a possessiveness he hadn't anticipated. Finally, after picking at his caviar-studded appetizer, Stephen decided he could no longer sit by and watch. He rose from his chair, ignoring Miranda's half-smile of triumph. "I'm going to say hello," he announced, trying to sound casual. "I'd like to keep things civil." Miranda's red-painted lips twitched with amusement. "Have fun," she said, swirling her wine. "I'll just be here, waiting." A swirl of tension coiled in Stephen's chest as he wound through the tables, trying not to look like a man on a mission. His footsteps grew heavier as he neared the center of the room. Within seconds, he stood near Mark and Kimberly's table. Up close, the scene was even more intimate than it appeared from afar. Mark leaned in slightly as Kimberly described something that made her eyes light up with passion. Stephen cleared his throat. Kimberly's gaze snapped upward. The moment she recognized him, her expression shifted from surprise to composure, the veneer of politeness sliding into place. "Stephen," she said, inclining her head. "I didn't expect to see you here." Mark Bronson, who had been halfway through a chuckle, grew quiet. His hazel eyes flickered with curiosity as he assessed the newcomer. He'd heard hints that Kimberly's divorce had involved a wealthy tech entrepreneur, but he'd never met Stephen Harding in person. Offering a polite nod, Mark extended a hand. "Good evening. I'm Mark Bronson." Stephen shook his hand, noting the firm grip that spoke of confidence. "Stephen Harding. I believe we've heard each other's names around town," he said. Beneath the surface pleasantries, Stephen's thoughts churned. This is the man who's replaced me in Kimberly's life. Kimberly mustered her calm. "How have you been, Stephen?" she asked, genuinely hoping to keep this encounter from turning ugly. She'd hoped her ex-husband wouldn't approach, but she knew a confrontation of some kind was inevitable. Stephen forced a smile. "Busy, as usual. Expanding business. I see you're out for a nice evening yourselves." He gestured around the gilded restaurant, as though to highlight the extravagance he was so familiar with. Mark nodded, not missing Stephen's slight edge. "Yes, we were celebrating a recent charitable milestone. Kimberly here was instrumental in raising funds for some new education initiatives." Stephen's lips tightened. He remembered a time when he and Kimberly had done philanthropic work together, but that was before his empire ballooned and time for genuine giving shrank. "That's nice," he offered. Kimberly caught the flicker of resentment in Stephen's eyes. She recognized it from the last months of their marriage, an anger that bristled whenever he felt overshadowed or left behind. She tried to maintain a polite facade, bracing for him to say something cutting. The last thing she wanted was a scene in front of Mark or the prying eyes of the restaurant's elite clientele. Just then Miranda appeared behind Stephen, hooking an arm through his. She smiled sweetly, though her eyes gleamed with mischief. "Hello," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand to Mark. "I'm Miranda Stone, Stephen's companion." The emphasis on companion was not lost on Kimberly. Miranda turned to Kimberly with a slight smirk. "And you must be the ex-wife. Pleasure to meet you." "I've heard so much." Kimberly remained poised, though her stomach churned. She recognized Miranda from tabloid photos, sleek, model-esque, the polar opposite of Kimberly's classic sophistication. "Charmed," Kimberly said, forcing herself to remain civil. Mark observed the tension, his brow furrowing with concern. He placed a supportive hand on Kimberly's back, a small gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Stephen. "Since we've all introduced ourselves, why don't you two join us for a moment?" Mark suggested, attempting to diffuse the awkwardness. "It's not every day we run into friends at La Premiere." Kimberly almost choked at the word friends, but managed to keep a pleasant expression. Stephen, seeing a chance to assert some control, quickly agreed. Miranda cast a triumphant glance at Kimberly, as though she'd been invited into some personal ring where she could flaunt her hold on Stephen. Reluctantly, Kimberly scooted her chair to make space. Her heart pounded, nerves jangling. Mark signaled a waiter for extra seats, inadvertently setting the stage for a swirl of emotions they were all ill-prepared to handle. As the new seating was arranged, the luxurious surroundings grew charged with tension. Mirrored walls reflected a quartet of people tied together by messy threads of love, betrayal, and budding new desires. The staff discreetly withdrew, sensing the friction. The next words exchanged at that table would shape all their futures in ways none of them could yet fathom. With the four of them gathered around a single candlelit table, La Premier's opulence felt too close, too intense like a gilded cage. Kimberly sat stiffly, wishing she were anywhere else. Yet as Mark offered a gracious smile and signaled the waiter to bring fresh wine glasses, she realized there was no graceful retreat. To leave abruptly might fan the flames of gossip. Miranda wasted no time. She leaned forward, batting her lashes. "This place is absolutely stunning," she cooed, as though reciting lines in a play. "Stephen and I come here often, don't we, darling?" Stephen nodded curtly, his thoughts visibly elsewhere. He kept glancing toward Mark, sizing him up, comparing their suits, their presence, even their mannerisms. His heart pounded with the raw, unexpected jealousy he felt at seeing Mark's protective stance toward Kimberly. Trying to salvage some civility, Mark cleared his throat. "I've heard the chef here is crafting a new tasting menu soon. Perhaps we should sample it sometime," he suggested, directing the comment more toward Kimberly. Kimberly forced a polite nod. She noticed Miranda studying Mark's watch, an exquisite Swiss timepiece worth more than some people's yearly salaries, and felt a twist of annoyance. She's probably measuring him up the same way she sized up Stephen, Kimberly thought. That realization sparked a flicker of empathy for Stephen. Had Miranda latched onto him just as soon as his star began to rise? Yet, was that empathy enough to overshadow the pain of their past? Hardly. Miranda took a dainty sip of champagne. "Mark," she began, faking casual interest. "It's Mark Bronson, right? CEO of the Bronson Hotel Group?" Mark nodded, the corners of his mouth tightening just a fraction. "That's correct. And you must be forging quite a path in the modeling world, I've heard." Miranda's eyelashes fluttered. "Oh, well, I dabble in print ads here and there. I'm mostly devoted to philanthropic causes with Stephen." She paused, letting the words sink in, much like Kimberly used to do with him. The jab was subtle, but the message was clear. "You're old news, Kimberly. I've taken your place." Kimberly's cheeks burned, but she maintained her composure. She refused to stoop to catty remarks, even if her stomach churned with anger. Mark gently tapped Kimberly's hand under the table, a small gesture of reassurance. She appreciated it more than words could convey. Stephen, however, noticed the movement, and his eyes flashed with something akin to regret. Had he pushed away someone who genuinely cared about him for a woman who seemed enthralled by status and wealth? He decided to redirect the conversation. "So, Mark, one understand you're expanding into Southeast Asia soon. Must be quite an undertaking." Mark responded with professional ease, describing his new hotels in Singapore and Hong Kong, the philanthropic programs his company sponsored for local communities, and the complexities of working across different cultures. Kimberly chimed in, referencing her experience coordinating events for an educational NGO in those regions. Their synergy was evident, and a natural camaraderie sparkled between them. Listening to Kimberly speak with knowledge and passion stirred an odd ache in Stephen. She had always been bright and driven, qualities that once pulled him in. He recalled how, in the early days of their marriage, he found her philanthropic zeal almost more captivating than her beauty. But success had changed him, and he suspected it had changed her too, though in different ways. Miranda sensed Stephen's distraction. She placed a manicured hand on his arm, smiling. "Stephen's also been traveling a lot, right, darling? He's looking into new offices in Dubai." She cast a quick glance at Mark's watch, then at his face, trying to gauge if he was impressed. Stephen forced a smile, reluctant to show vulnerability. "Yes, Dubai. We've got major investors there." He tossed out some remarks about global expansions, but the spark in his voice was absent. The conversation lulled, the tension thick in the air. Then, unexpectedly, a man approached the table. He was the maitre d' vivre, accompanied by a discreet staff member who murmured something about a disturbance with paparazzi outside. The maitre d' offered hush apologies, explaining that a few recognized faces in the restaurant tonight had drawn media attention. "Shall we move you to a private lounge?" the maitre d' asked politely, glancing between Mark Bronson and Stephen Harding. "We want to ensure your privacy and that of your guests." Kimberly's heart skipped. She knew any paparazzi photos of the four of them together could spawn a tabloid frenzy. Mark glanced at her, reading her concern. "We'd appreciate that," he replied. They rose, the staff leading them through a side corridor into a more secluded, plush lounge area enclosed by velvet curtains. A grand piano stood in the corner, unoccupied, while soft jazz piped through hidden speakers. The lighting was dimmer, intimate, heightening the sense of claustrophobia. Miranda perched on a velvet settee, crossing her legs elegantly, looking all too pleased with this VIP detour. Stephen stood by her side, but cast frequent glances toward Kimberly and Mark, who seated themselves on a nearby chaise. The staff offered fresh champagne. No one refused. Each sip seemed to sharpen the undercurrents coursing between them. At last, Mark broke the silence. "Well, this is unexpected." He managed a wry smile at Kimberly, who returned a slight shrug. She wanted to vanish into the floor, but she also felt an unspoken resolve to show that she wasn't cowed by Stephen or his mistress. Miranda decided to stir the pot. "I recall reading about your divorce settlement, Kimberly. Very hush-hush. But these things always leak eventually, don't they?" Her question was directed at Mark, as though inviting him to speculate. Kimberly stiffened, rage boiling beneath her cool exterior. Mark frowned. "That's personal, Miss Stone," he said, voice firm. "I'm sure none of us want to indulge in gossip." Miranda's lips parted in a slow, cat-like smile. "Of course, my apologies." The apology rang hollow. Stephen felt an inward lurch of guilt. Had he truly allowed someone so catty and shallow into his life? Yet his pride wouldn't let him denounce her in front of Mark and Kimberly. Not yet. Instead, he redirected the topic again. "Mark, how do you manage to balance personal life with a global empire?" Mark responded with gracious politeness, describing how he delegated tasks, remained in contact with philanthropic boards, and tried to preserve personal time. Kimberly listened, reminded again of the synergy between them: philanthropy, business, a sense of purpose. She cast a fleeting glance at Stephen, recalling how once upon a time they had shared a vision of building success for a greater good. Now, that dream lay shattered, replaced by this odd show of one-upmanship. The hush lounge's intimacy offered no escape from the swirling emotions. They sipped their champagne, each one grappling with regrets, insecurities, or anger. And somewhere outside, cameras flashed, capturing fragments of the night's drama for the tabloids to twist and turn. Inside the private lounge, the tension had crystallized. Miranda, determined not to be overshadowed, peppered Mark with questions about his philanthropic efforts. She tried to align herself with him, making vague claims of her own charitable interests. Though she fumbled with details whenever pressed, Stephen hovered beside her, mind churning. He realized how forced Miranda's conversation seemed, especially compared to the genuine passion Kimberly and Mark shared for these causes. Finally, Mark stood, offering a polite bow of his head. "I need a moment to talk to the maitre d' about ensuring our privacy," he explained. "Kimberly, would you care to join me?" He wanted to give her an out and escape from this claustrophobic arrangement. She accepted, leaving Stephen and Miranda momentarily alone on the plush settee. The silence between them was thick enough to slice. Miranda fiddled with her phone, as though considering a quick selfie to capture her glamorous surroundings. Stephen's thoughts swirled with regrets. He didn't want to be with a woman who only saw him as a wallet and a stepping stone to fame. Yet part of him had chosen this path, drawn to the superficial lure when his marriage was failing. Impulsively, he reached for Miranda's phone, lowering it. "Enough pictures, please," he muttered. A flicker of annoyance crossed her features, but she complied. "I just wanted one quick—" I said enough. Stephen's voice had an edge that startled even himself. He exhaled, forcing calm. "Sorry. It's just, this is complicated." Miranda angled her body toward him. "Stephen," she said softly, touching his arm, "is seeing Kimberly with that CEO messing with your head?" He twitched, uncomfortable with the question. But Miranda pressed on. "Look, I get it. Exes can stir up feelings, especially if they're doing better than you expected. But remember, you're successful too. I'm by your side. Don't let some old flame overshadow what we have." Her words, meant to reassure, only added to his turmoil. He wasn't sure what he had with Miranda. She liked the parties, the trips, the lavish gifts. But did she care about him, the man beneath the money? He recalled Kimberly's unwavering support in his startup days, how she believed in him before the world did. The wave of longing nearly choked him. He brushed Miranda's hand away gently. "Let's not discuss it now. They'll be back soon." He forced a half smile, but his eyes betrayed conflict. Miranda, not one to let her territory be threatened, concealed her frustration behind a poised facade. Across the lounge, Mark and Kimberly spoke with the maitre d'. While Mark handled the logistics, Kimberly's eyes darted back to the settee, anxious about leaving Stephen and Miranda alone. She worried Miranda might stir drama. Mark noticed her unease. "Everything all right?" She mustered a small, tense smile. "I'm fine. Just. Never expected to dine with my ex-husband and his mistress tonight." Mark nodded sympathetically. "That's a lot to handle. If you want, we can leave. I'm sure I can arrange a discreet exit." Kimberly considered it. She craved an escape, but something inside her also wanted closure. Perhaps facing Stephen and Miranda was a step toward healing. "Let's just wrap this up gracefully," she decided. "We can say our goodbyes and go." Mark admired her poise. "You're braver than you think," he murmured. She felt a flutter of warmth at his quiet praise. They returned to the table, where Stephen had adopted a stiff posture next to Miranda. Tension lingered in the air like a static charge. Kimberly cleared her throat. "I think Mark and I will be heading out soon. We have an early morning event tomorrow." Stephen nodded, relief mixing with an odd disappointment. Miranda pursed her lips, eyeing Kimberly's gown. "Shame. The night's young. Are you sure you don't want to stay and catch up more?" Her tone dripped with sarcasm. She seemed to enjoy prodding Kimberly's discomfort. Mark interjected smoothly. "Kimberly's philanthropic schedule keeps her busy. We'd hate to overstay." He turned to Stephen, extending a hand. "It was interesting to meet you. Best of luck with your expansions." Stephen forced a polite nod. "Yes, likewise. Maybe we'll cross paths again." The words felt hollow, but he tried to salvage dignity. Kimberly, not trusting herself to speak more than necessary, simply offered Miranda a cool smile. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," she said, mastering her composure. Miranda reciprocated with a saccharine grin. "Oh, we will." With that, Mark placed a gentle hand at the small of Kimberly's back, guiding her through the lounge's velvet drapes. A staff member led them to a discreet exit, away from paparazzi. As they slipped into the elevator, Kimberly breathed a shaky sigh of relief. Mark studied her profile. "You're handling this with remarkable grace. I know it's not easy." She gave him a wry half-smile. "I appreciate you stepping in. If you weren't there, I might have lost my cool." An unspoken gratitude flickered between them, a sense that Mark was more than just a philanthropic partner or dinner date. He might be a quiet ally in her pursuit of healing. Meanwhile, in the lounge, Stephen signaled the staff to bring him a stiff drink. Miranda rubbed his shoulder in what she deemed a comforting gesture. He stared at the empty corridor where Kimberly had disappeared, a turmoil roiling in his chest, jealousy, regret, and an oddly protective longing. Miranda, sensing his mood, cooed softly, "Don't dwell on your ex. We have a flight to Street Bart soon, remember? Let's focus on us." Stephen tore his gaze from the drapes, forcing a half smile. "Yeah, us." But in the back of his mind, Kimberly's poised face haunted him. He had once had her support, her love. Now, she was forging a new path with a man who seemed to appreciate every aspect of her. The finality of it gnawed at him, a reminder of the cracks he had allowed to form in his once promising marriage. As the lounge's low jazz tunes resumed, two very different couples wrestled with unspoken truths. One pair left the shimmering walls behind, stepping into a city full of infinite possibility. The other remained, anchored to illusions of a glamorous life, but burdened by a growing suspicion that everything glittered far less brightly than before. The tabloids wasted no time fueling speculation about the unusual four-way dinner at La Premiere. By the next morning, social media buzzed with photos of Mark Bronson escorting Kimberly Peterson out a side door, while Stephen Harding and Miranda Stone lingered behind. Various outlets spun their own narratives: wealthy tech entrepreneur caught in awkward run-in with ex-wife and hotel magnate, or Miranda Stone's icy stare, jealous of CEOs, flirtation with the former Miss S. Harding. Kimberly woke to a string of messages from friends who either offered sympathy or wanted juicy details. She responded politely, stating only that it was a coincidence and that everyone remained cordial. Deep down, however, she could still feel the tension vibrating. After grabbing a cup of coffee, she scrolled through the headlines, vowing not to let the media circus drag her back into heartbreak. She was scheduled to meet Mark at his corporate office that day to finalize a philanthropic partnership. Pausing at her reflection in the hallway mirror, she tucked a stray hair behind her ear. She resolved to keep her composure. Last night's messy entanglement wouldn't overshadow her professional goals. An hour later, she arrived at Bronson International Tower, a gleaming skyscraper that symbolized Mark's empire. The executive reception area boasted polished marble floors and minimalist art pieces. A personal assistant guided her to Mark's private meeting room. She expected a formal atmosphere, but Mark greeted her with a warm smile. "Kimberly, thanks for coming. Let's sit down." They discussed the planned scholarship fund, the distribution of resources, and a timeline for official announcements. Despite the businesslike topic, an undercurrent of personal concern simmered. Eventually, Mark broached the subject. "How are you holding up after last night? I hope the media hasn't swarmed you." Kimberly sighed. "The tabloids love to spin narratives, but I'll manage. I just appreciate your support. It could have been ugly if you hadn't been there." Mark's expression softened. "You know you can rely on me. And I'm sorry you had to face that. It's never easy running into and especially one with a complicated history." She gave a grateful nod. "I'm lucky. I had a real friend by my side." The word friend hung in the air, and Mark's eyes flickered with an unspoken question. Kimberly didn't miss the nuance, but she wasn't prepared to define anything more yet. Instead, she cleared her throat and returned to philanthropic talk, feeling a swirl of conflicting emotions. Friendship, something deeper. She needed time to pass her feelings. On the opposite side of town, Stephen Harding languished in his penthouse, ignoring the business emails piling up. He was due to jet to Street Bart's with Miranda in 3 days, but the prospect no longer thrilled him. Instead, he found himself replaying the sight of Kimberly with Mark Bronson. She seemed truly happy, he thought, a pang of regret hitting him like a gut punch. Miranda swanned about the living room, instructing the house staff on which outfits to pack. Every now and then, she tried to engage Stephen. "What do you think of this bathing suit? Or should I bring the diamond set you gave me last month?" He'd give half-hearted replies, stirring a growing dissatisfaction within her. She sensed his heart wasn't in the upcoming trip. Finally, she plunked herself down on the couch beside him, crossing her arms. "Stephen, you've been moody ever since we left La Premiere. Is it Kimberly? Are you jealous or something?" His knee-jerk reaction was to deny. "I'm not jealous," he said tightly. But even as he spoke, an internal voice told him otherwise. He was envious of Mark's unbridled success, sure, but also of the genuine connection Mark and Kimberly seemed to share. I don't like how the press is twisting things," Miranda huffed. "Let them talk. We've got a flight to paradise soon. Focus on that." She stood, tossing her hair. "I need to pick up some last-minute items on Fifth Avenue. Join me?" Stephen shook his head, feigning busyness. "I have calls." Disappointed but unwilling to waste her day, Miranda left. Alone, Stephen mulled over the irony. He was the one who had ended his marriage for a freer, more glamorous life. Now he found himself unfulfilled, craving something deeper. He recalled how Kimberly once believed in him unconditionally, how they'd share late-night conversations about using their wealth to make a difference. With Miranda, those discussions never arose unless they served some PR angle. Impulsively, Stephen grabbed his phone and scrolled to a contact he hadn't used since the divorce, Jessica Morgan, a mutual friend who remained closer to Kimberly after everything fell apart. Jessica was known for her level-headed advice. Perhaps Stephen just needed to hear from someone who understood the real Kimberly. He hesitated, then typed a quick message. "Hey Jess, it's Stephen. I know it's been a while. Could we talk?" Seconds turned to minutes, and just when he assumed Jessica would ignore him, a reply popped up. "This is unexpected. Are you okay?" Stephen exhaled shakily. He typed back, "Not really. Need some perspective," she responded with a short directive. "Meet me at the Hudson Cafe 4 p.m. tomorrow." Stephen set down the phone, feeling a swirl of relief and anxiety. Jessica was notoriously blunt. If he sought perspective, she'd give it whether or not it was comfortable. Still, he wanted clarity about his feelings for Kimberly, for his life with Miranda. Something had to give, or he risked sinking further into regret. He trudged to the bedroom window, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline he'd once found so thrilling. Now, each glimmering building seemed to mock him. Wealth and success had never felt so hollow. And as the hours ticked by, a single truth pressed on him. He might have lost something priceless, and it might be too late to reclaim it. The next afternoon, Stephen arrived at the Hudson Cafe, a cozy spot near the river that bustled with young professionals on lunch breaks. He spotted Jessica Morgan in a corner booth, sipping a latte. She was flipping through a magazine, her wavy brown hair framing a face etched with skepticism. When she caught sight of Stephen, her lips pressed into a tight line, neither a smile nor a frown, more like measured neutrality. Stephen slid into the seat opposite her. The lingering scent of espresso grounded him somewhat, but his nerves flickered. Jessica set the magazine aside, crossing her arms. "You said you needed perspective," she began bluntly. "So, talk." He rubbed his temples, searching for the right words. "I ran into Kimberly last night, at La Premiere. She was with Mark Bronson." He explained the swirl of tension, the forced conversation, and how it sparked an unsettling jealousy he hadn't foreseen. Jessica arched an eyebrow. "Well, you ended the marriage, remember? If she's moved on, that's within her rights." Stephen winced. "I know. It's not that I don't want her to be happy, I do. But seeing them together made me realize that maybe I messed up. I never properly appreciated what Kimberly and I had." Jessica's gaze sharpened. "Let me guess. Now that you see her with a man who's possibly more successful and philanthropic than you, it's chafing your ego." The pointed observation stung. Stephen's shoulders slumped. "I suppose so," he admitted softly. "I hate feeling overshadowed, but it's more than that. Kimberly's not just a trophy I can't have, she was genuine. We shared a deeper bond once." And I can't help but wonder if I gave up too easily. Jessica studied him for a moment. So what about Miranda? He hesitated. She's fun, I guess, but it's shallow. I realize I've been trying to fill a void with parties and extravagances. She's not interested in building anything meaningful, at least not from what I see. And I'm honestly not sure if I love her, or if I love the idea of not being alone. Jessica snorted softly. Sounds like a recipe for disaster. Listen, Stephen, you know I took Kimberly's side after the divorce because I saw how devastated she was. She deserved better. And you were too caught up in your new millionaire lifestyle to see the damage you caused. Are you asking me if you should try to get her back? Stephen's throat tightened. Is that even possible? She's with Mark Bronson. They seem well matched. I don't want to sabotage her happiness. Jessica took a slow sip of her latte, her expression softening. Kimberly's a grown woman. She's done with the heartbreak, and I know Mark respects her. If you want to try to reconnect, you'd better be prepared for the possibility that she might reject you. She might choose Mark. A pang of dread twisted in Stephen's chest. So you think I should just move on? I think you need to figure out what you truly want. And if you're willing to do the work to earn her trust back, if that's even on the table. She leaned in. But let's be clear, she owes you nothing. If you're expecting an easy reconciliation, forget it. And if this is just about your bruised ego, do us all a favor and let her find her happiness. Stephen drew a shaky breath, feeling both gratitude and shame. This is why I asked for perspective, he thought. You're right. It's not just ego. I regret how I let success overshadow what mattered. But I don't want to be the villain in her story anymore. Jessica's gaze was oddly sympathetic. Then talk to her. Apologize without expectations. If there's any chance for a new chapter, it starts with honesty. They spoke for another half hour, dissecting the complexities. Jessica offered a final caution. Don't forget, Mark's not some fling. He's a powerful man who could give Kimberly everything she once dreamed of with you, minus the drama. The words weighed heavily on Stephen, but also crystallized his resolve. After Jessica left, Stephen lingered, staring at the swirling foam in his untouched coffee. He typed a message to his assistant, instructing them to cancel the street Bart's trip with Miranda. If he was going to face the emotional chaos within, he needed to stop running off to tropical distractions. Yet how would Miranda react? Probably with fury, or worse, cunning. He had to handle that too, but first, he needed to figure out a genuine way to speak with Kimberly. Perhaps invite her to coffee, or even better, to a safe, neutral setting where they could talk alone. He had no illusions that a single conversation could fix everything, but it might be the first step toward redemption or final closure. As he left the cafe, a faint sense of clarity accompanied him. The city's hustle and bustle felt less suffocating and more like a symphony of possibilities. He realized that real success wasn't about having the best table at La Première or the flashiest penthouse. It was about forging meaningful connections, living with integrity, and maybe, just maybe, finding a love that endured beyond the novelty of wealth. Stephen Harding stared at his phone, heart pounding. The message he'd just typed felt too raw, too vulnerable. Kimberly, it's Stephen. Could we meet for coffee? Just to talk? He hesitated, hovering over the send button. Memories of their last encounter at La Première flooded his mind. Kimberly, radiant and confident with Mark Bronson at her side. A pang of jealousy and regret twisted inside him. But if he wanted any sense of closure or forgiveness, he needed to take this step. Finally, he pressed send. To his surprise, her reply came minutes later. When and where? Relief blended with nerves. He proposed meeting at Westside Park the next day. She agreed, succinct and calm, giving away little about her emotions. That night, Stephen barely slept, torn between hope and dread. The following afternoon, bright sunlight illuminated Westside Park. Families picnicked on the grass, joggers circled the pond. Stephen chose a bench near the fountain, where the water sprayed in graceful arcs. Clutching a latte he could hardly taste, he scanned the crowd. Soon he spotted Kimberly approaching. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, exuding understated elegance. "Thank you for coming," he said softly when she reached him. She sat on the bench, leaving space between them. "I'm curious why you wanted to meet," she replied, her voice steady. Stephen inhaled. For a moment, he thought of all the unspoken regrets that had built up in the months since their divorce. "I needed to apologize properly," he began. "I hurt you in ways I can't fully undo. I let success consume me, and I took our marriage for granted." Kimberly's gaze flickered toward the fountain. "I appreciate that," she said, fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "But apologies can't erase everything." He nodded. "I know. I'm not expecting you to forget what happened or offer me another chance. I just can't keep pretending. I'm okay with how we ended. Seeing you at La Premiere, it shook me." Silence settled between them, punctuated only by the splash of the fountain. Kimberly studied his face. She remembered when they were newlyweds, brimming with shared dreams. But those dreams dissolved under the weight of Stephen's ambition. "I'm not the same person I was," she said quietly. "I've built a new life working with charities and, well, connecting with Mark." A flicker of jealousy crossed Stephen's features, but he forced a wan smile. "He seems like a good man. Want you to be happy, truly." Kimberly's eyes narrowed, uncertain whether to believe him. "So why now?" Stephen exhaled, wrestling with the admission. "Because I ended things with Miranda. I woke up one day and realized I'd surrounded myself with shallow pursuits. I was lonely in a crowd. It took me too long to see that I was chasing something meaningless." He glanced away, voice thickening. "But seeing you, thriving and passionate about your causes, it reminded me how far I drifted from who I wanted to be." Emotions churned in Kimberly's chest, compassion, wariness, and a lingering grief. She cleared her throat. "Stephen, I'm glad you're realizing these things, but it doesn't change the past. We can't just pretend we didn't have a painful divorce." He swallowed hard. "I'm not asking for that. I just wanted to own my mistakes and let you know I admire what you've become. If there's any way I can support your charitable work, I'd like to, even if we're never together again." Her voice trembled slightly. "Thank you. That means more than you know." For a moment, they fell silent, each recalling better days before betrayal and heartbreak. A breeze stirred leaves overhead, and faint laughter echoed from the other side of the park. Eventually, Kimberly spoke. "I accept your apology, but I'm moving forward, Stephen. With or without Mark, I've learned to stand on my own. I hope you find your own path too." He nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. "That's all I wanted, a chance to make amends, even if it's just words. Thank you for hearing me out." They rose from the bench, coffees untouched. She gave him a small, wistful smile. "Take care of yourself." He offered a hesitant wave, then turned to leave. Kimberly stood there, watching him merge into the crowd, uncertain whether to feel relieved or nostalgic. The fountain's rhythmic spray glittered in the sun as she exhaled, heart lighter than before. Maybe, at last, they had the closure they needed, and maybe she was finally free to embrace her future wherever it led. Weeks passed, and the dramatic run-in at La Premiere faded from public chatter. Kimberly Peterson immersed herself in her work at the NGO, orchestrating a high-profile charity gala that promised to deliver significant funds for youth education. Each day, she woke feeling more assured of who she was, no longer Stephen Harding's ex, but a competent, respected organizer in the philanthropic world. She seldom thought of the coffee meeting at Westside Park, yet the conversation lingered in her mind. Stephen's apology had given her a sense of closure. He was no longer a looming shadow of guilt or pain. For once, she felt free to explore new possibilities without baggage. Mark Bronson's presence in her life also intensified. They had continued collaborating on various projects, and each interaction revealed more of his sincere character. He was wealthy, yes, but also principled and empathetic. Whenever she felt overwhelmed by event logistics, Mark was there with practical advice or even a comforting hand on her shoulder. Slowly, the lines between professional and personal blurred. The day of the charity gala arrived. Held in the glittering ballroom of a historic hotel, the event teemed with philanthropists, celebrities, and key influencers. Kimberly donned a midnight blue gown, her hair swept into a loose updo. She moved through the crowd, ensuring every detail was perfect: the silent auction, the keynote speakers, the sumptuous dinner service. On stage, she introduced Mark for a speech about the impact of strategic giving. His words resonated with the audience, underscoring how wealth could become a tool for societal good. When the program ended, Mark found Kimberly amid the swirling guests. He guided her to a quieter alcove lined with tall windows overlooking the city. "You did an outstanding job," he said, voice warm. "We surpassed our fundraising goal." She exhaled, adrenaline still coursing through her. "I'm relieved and thrilled. Thank you for all your support. Without your hotel group sponsorship, we wouldn't have reached these numbers." He smiled, stepping closer. "There's something I've been meaning to ask. When all this settles, can I take you to dinner? A real dinner, not a working meal or a rushed bite in between meetings." His hazel eyes brimmed with earnestness. Kimberly felt her cheeks flush. After her divorce, she'd sworn off romance for a while, hesitant to trust again. But Mark wasn't Stephen. He stood before her with genuine kindness, not just charm. She found herself nodding. "I'd like that very much." They sealed it with a shared laugh, the air tinged with promise. A sense of excitement fluttered in Kimberly's chest. Perhaps she was ready for something more than professional camaraderie. Meanwhile, across the city, Stephen Harding stood in front of a modest community center. He'd quietly made a major donation to fund new computers and science kits for underprivileged kids, a cause he and Kimberly once dreamed of supporting together. Now, he took that dream forward alone, determined to find meaning in giving back. Watching children excitedly explore the newly equipped rooms brought a rare smile to his face. He thought about Kimberly, wondering if she'd ever hear about this. Part of him hoped she would, not for praise, but for a subtle understanding that he was trying to be the man he should have been all along. Later that evening, Stephen returned to his penthouse to find it quiet, absent the parties and shallow gatherings that once filled it. He prepared a simple dinner, reflecting on how drastically his priorities had shifted. Miranda Stone was long gone off to the next lavish scene, presumably, and good riddance. Stephen realized that maybe being alone wasn't so bad if he could fill the emptiness with purpose, whether through volunteer work, therapy, or forging genuine friendships. 1 month after the gala, Kimberly and Mark sat at an intimate corner table in a little-known French bistro. Unlike La Premiere, this place had no paparazzi lurking, no ornate decor, just soft lighting and excellent cuisine. Over laughter and shared stories, they discovered how much they aligned, from values on philanthropy to personal passions like travel and reading. When they finally walked out, hand in hand, Kimberly felt lightness flood her heart. She glanced at the moonlit sky, remembering the heartbreak she once believed insurmountable. Perhaps life truly could start anew after crushing disappointments. There, under the gentle glow of city lights, she realized she was no longer haunted by the past. She had found a fresh horizon, one shaped by mutual respect, renewed purpose, and the thrilling possibility that this time, love might endure. Thank you for joining us on this emotional roller coaster of love, betrayal, and the rediscovery of purpose. Kimberly's journey reminds us that heartbreak can lead to transformative growth, that true wealth isn't measured by lavish dinners or glittering possessions, but by the strength of our bonds and the sincerity of our intentions. Even when the past collides unexpectedly with the present, as it did at that fateful restaurant, we have the power to shape our own destiny and find a fresh start. If you were captivated by Kimberly, Stephen, and Mark's story, please hit the like button to show your support. Share this video with friends who love poignant, dramatic tales, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the depths of love, ambition, and redemption. Your engagement keeps our channel thriving. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to bringing you more riveting drama soon.